Chuck Schumer in the House, obviously, fashionably late.
Motorcades, motorcades, and motorcades.
Should have planned that in our own timing. So Schumer, welcome to the grill, where obviously we know how to flip hamburgers. Ooh, guys, tough audience here. Look, Schumer is obviously here. We're excited to have him here because he is one of the top 3 people who are going to decide what gets done in 2025 if Democrats win a trifecta and what doesn't get done.
One word answer, a lot of good stuff.
But before we get to 2025 and Harris, let's dive into some recent past. Obviously, you are one of the few people who were behind the scenes when it came to Biden making this decision to drop out. Tonight is a big night for the president. He's going to be basking in the spotlight, be hailed as a hero for putting party first and deciding to step aside. To just start, tell us, what is the legacy that you think he left behind?
Yeah, and I wouldn't just say he put party first, although you're right. He put country first. And he deserves all the credit in the world, Rachel. You know, when you've had such an amazing career as he has, and I've been with him for, 40 years. When I was a House member and he was in the Senate, we passed the Brady Law and the Assault Weapons Ban and the Violence Against Women Act together. And what we did in 21-22, one of the greatest presidencies and legislative sessions that we've had in decades. So he's done amazing. But he knew he had to put country first. He knew that it was so important to prevent Donald Trump, he said it in his own words, to prevent Donald Trump from being president, that if he was going to stand in the way of that, he wouldn't. Didn't surprise me. He has always done the right thing. And look at the legacy he leaves. So many things that he has gotten done, whether it's the early stuff that I talked about before, or look at what we did together in 21, 22. The infrastructure bill. Unbelievable. Donald Trump, he talked about infrastructure week being every week. He couldn't get a damn thing done. We got it done in a magnificent way. The CHIPS and Science bill, which is bringing back manufacturing to America, putting science there. Unbelievable. The IRA bill, biggest advance in climate that we have ever had. And finally, we went in after the drug companies. Insulin will now be $35 a month for anyone over 65. We're going to still work hard in the rest of his term to get that done for everybody. We hope we'll get some Republicans to join us. Too many of them are in the pocket of the drug companies. The first major gun legislation, I can't stop because what he's done is so great. The first major gun legislation against the NRA in a very long time. Marriage equality. My daughter and her wife are going to live much more happy because we passed that legislation. Unbelievable. To step down from that, boy, you have to be some super patriot. That's what he is.
So, in spite of these accomplishments that you're talking about, Future Forward, the Democratic outside group, told the Cook Political report this morning that if he would have stayed in, his chances of winning, according to their own polling behind the scenes, were in the single digits. Do you think that's right? And do you think that if he stayed in the race, that Trump would have won?
Well, look, he said himself that his #1 goal was to prevent Trump from being president. And I think he made it, I'm not going to put percentages on it, but I think he made a decision that there was too great a risk of Trump being president, and therefore he did the it's courageous. What he did is not just right, and not just beautiful, and not just patriotic, it's courageous. And he did the courageous thing. So he made that decision. I don't have to second guess what percent the numbers were. He did the right thing.
So unlike other senior Democrats on the Hill, when they watched the debate, a lot of them said that they thought, his campaign was over. You didn't think that right away, it sounds like. You were sort of waiting to see the polls. Did you have any sense, though, before the debate, how much he was struggling? Or were you surprised, I suppose, as the rest of us were?
Yeah, look, I talked to Joe Biden on a regular basis. We planned and plotted all these great legislative things together. For the people who said he was incapable because of one problem or another, look at what he's accomplished. That's the best answer to that. And so you know, the debate was a bad thing. It was a very bad day for him. It's stuck in the public's mind and would be hard to get out, no matter what his condition really was. And so he made the right decision. That's all I can say. I mean, I'm awed by the decision.
So you are of the belief that that truly was a one-off debate performance. You hadn't seen this behind the scenes.
Look, there had always been times when anybody forgets a word, goes on a little bit of a tangent, but nothing like the debate.
So you took a very different approach than Nancy Pelosi did. I know you guys are very close.
We are.
She was sort of
I know
more
her
of a...
phone number by heart. You want me to tell it to you?
Please do, actually.
It begins with 415.
So she was more public in terms of instigating things, right? She went on Morning Joe and gave those now infamous comments about him rethinking the decision to stay in the race. She told her members to go public if they needed to. You were more sort of diplomatic, telling reporters, I'm with Joe, when we were pressing you about this on the Hill. You were asking senators to convey their concerns privately. I'm curious if this was an intentional good cop, bad cop approach, a la Chuck and Nancy partnership?
Look, I think Nancy did what she thought was appropriate and right. I did what I thought was appropriate and right. It was my view for several reasons. I had lots of people call me, hundreds, maybe 1,000, saying he shouldn't run. And what I said to every one of them, whether they be a senator or a political activist or a contributor, I said, you have every right to have that view. And you should have an obligation, if you feel that way, to tell the people you know in the Biden campaign. But do it privately. And do it privately for two reasons. One, counterproductive. When you tell anybody, particularly, you know, someone who's had so many achievements, that they should step down or this or that, their back gets up. If you do it publicly, they would think you're trying to pressure them as opposed to giving them advice. But second, to me at least, who I love the man, and we work so closely together, it just felt wrong to publicly say he should step down. I thought we ought to do it. We ought to do it privately if people wanted to do it. And I also told people, if you think he should stay, call him up and tell him that too. But do it privately. I thought it would be both more effective and more honorable and humane.
So there was a certain point that you worried President Biden wasn't getting this message that you and senators were giving to some of his aides. So you decided you needed to request an in-person meeting with Biden. This is about a week before I think he dropped out.
Yes.
But first, you actually did a call with Leader Jeffries, former President Obama, and Speaker Pelosi. Was this all one call or all these separate calls? What were they like, and how were you guys frankly, talking about how to handle this?
I spoke with Leader Jeffries quite frequently. We were on the same basic page in terms of how this should be handled. I spoke with President Obama a few times. Actually, I didn't speak. I don't think I spoke even once with Speaker Pelosi, Congressmember Pelosi, on this issue.
And what did Obama say to you? Because he kind of kept quiet through all of this.
Well, I'm not going to give my private conversations with the former president, make it public. That's up to him to decide. But we had a number of serious discussions.
That's no fun. You don't want to break some news right now about you? So you drove up to meet with Biden in Delaware a week before he drops out. There's been reporting that you opened by saying you were there out of love and affection for him as a friend, and you delivered a personal message that focused on three things: protecting his legacy, the future of the country, and the impact on Congress, and to think about the Supreme Court. But we haven't seen any details about what he said to you, and so I'm wondering if you could tell a little more about that conversation.
Just as with former President Obama, if President Biden wants to talk about what he said to me, that's his prerogative. I won't mind if he does, but I'm not going to do that for him.
So about a week later, he drops out, and he actually called you. You were one of the few members that he called and said he changed his mind.
Yes.
Why do you think he called you when he didn't call other people to let them know
Well,
this? And
look,
how is that tone different?
I don't know the answer explicitly, but I always treated him with respect. I did that previously, as you said. I just said I'm with Joe, and I didn't give any negativity in any way. And in our meeting, it was the same way. It was respectful. It was loving. There was no confrontation, no argument, a discussion. And that's because of the respect I have for the man. You know, I'm so glad tonight is his night. he is going to be regarded as a huge hero. One of the things, if I were producing this show, I would tell the producers of the show, you better tell people it's going to go long for about 10 extra minutes, because the applause for Joe Biden, the standing ovations for Joe Biden, are not going to stop. And that's a great thing. I can't wait to be there and watch. And applaud.
Just a couple more questions on this, and I swear we'll move on to the agenda in the future.
Rachel, you are an excellent reporter.
No, I'm not getting anything out of you right now. We want the details of you and the president.
Senator, too.
So without getting into specifics, since you said you didn't want to, we know that one of the reasons President Biden didn't want to drop out for a long time was that, there was a fear that someone else couldn't beat Donald Trump. Is that what changed his mind? Can you give us a flavor about where it was different from when you talked to him that day in Delaware and when he ultimately called you and said, I'm doing this? Why? Why did he choose to do it?
I'm sorry, I don't mean to repeat myself, but you'll have to ask him those things.
He's no
do
fun.
know this,
He's no fun.
that Joe Biden knew and made it clear that defeating Donald Trump was an imperative, a political imperative, an economic imperative, a moral imperative if you believed and loved in democracy. And I do know this, as is clear. He has confidence that Kamala Harris will beat Donald Trump, and I share that confidence. I don't think this past few weeks is an aberration. It's going to continue that way. So I know that it's obvious he had that confidence, but again, as to how his thought process worked, and I knew some of it, but I'm going to let him share that with you.
But he's never shown, apparently he is angry. We've had reported that he is still angry, especially at Pelosi, but also at Obama and perhaps a little at you. He hasn't showed that anger at all?
No, in fact, we spoke. He called me just the other day. We talked about what happened. He was, and we talked about some of the things. He did two things. We talked about some of the upcoming legislation, not letting these right-wing Republicans shut the government down. But he also asked me all about the Senate races and how he could help and which states he could be in and involved. So it was a great conversation, just like the old days.
Okay, enough about Biden. Let's talk about the future. So last week, Harris rolled out some specifics on her economic agenda, $25,000 to help first-time homeowners with their down payment, a first-time ban on corporate price gouging, expanded affordable housing, and increasing the child tax credit up to $6,000 for families with newborns the first year. Are these sort of just the hopes and dreams of Democrats, or do you actually think, and are you committed to passing these things in the first 3 months?
I am committed to passing them. I agree with them. First, Kamala Harris understands what working families, what average middle-class families go through. And so she came up with a platform that really answers their concerns. What's one of the number one things if you ask people, say, 25 to 35 or 40? Housing. And one of the biggest barriers in the way of housing is not the monthly payment that people will have to make. Interest rates, thank God, are coming down. But that down payment. People don't have enough money for that down payment, so they can never buy a house. And then they're paying rent all the time. And as you know, rent doesn't accumulate to your bottom line the way a mortgage payment would. And so she came up with this great idea. I think it's a fabulous idea. All of these ideas are aimed at what affects average working people and what concerns them. It was almost as if, and I think she's good at this instinctively, she was sitting in a room with 20, 35-year-olds and saying, what do you need? And this is what they came up with. But let me make a broader point. Are we going to pass these things? Look, ladies and gentlemen of America, look at what happened when Democrats had the presidency, the Senate, and the House. We got more good things passed for people in terms of reducing costs. We finally went after the pharmaceutical industry and got things done there. Not just the insulin price, which I was passionate about. We're going to try to get it for everybody if Republicans will join us. It now only goes to 35 years and older. But look at all the other things that we were able to do in terms of infrastructure and creating jobs, in terms of bringing jobs back to America, the chip fab industry, in terms of so much good to help us economically. People's heating costs are going to be reduced because of our IRA and our clean energy program and the tax rebates that are in there. Those heating bills are a killer for so many people, and the air conditioning bills as well, if you live in a more sunny clime. So Look at what we did. And my plea to the American people, if you want to have a bunch of name calling and you want to have a bunch of just, circus-like atmosphere, elect Donald Trump. But I think the American people are a lot smarter than that. You want to get things done to deal with higher costs, to deal with the things that are bothering the average American family. Elect Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. Keep Chuck Schumer majority leader. Make Hakeem Jeffries speaker.
So the Washington Post said of her economic proposal that she, quote, squandered the moment on populist gimmicks. They specifically took issue with this idea of capping grocery prices, saying that a lot of these companies, these grocery stores, don't have, are not known for huge margins of profitability. Do you have any concerns about that? And what do you say to either centrists or Republicans who say this isn't workable?
If you study her bill, she doesn't just say, oh, they can't make any profit. She looks when there is gouging, when some condition in the economy creates some kind of bottleneck and they go way overboard in charging a price way beyond a reasonable profit. That's a good thing. That's a good thing to do. And I'd make another point, not just about the grocery industry, but about so much of American industry. Where are they putting all this money? Into stock buybacks. What do stock buybacks do? They don't employ a single worker. They don't put a single dollar into new equipment. They don't do anything except raise the stock price so that the corporate CEO and their board can look better. Those buybacks are where so much trillions of corporate dollars are going into, and dealing with that kind of thing, as well as price gouging and others, I know this is something that most of my colleagues support.
So the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget apparently got a statement from the Harris campaign saying they would pay for these proposals, which add up to, they estimated, about $2 trillion over a decade, by using the Biden budget proposals on tax hikes on corporations and wealthier individuals. We saw some news today that Harris is looking at a 25% corporate tax rate, which is obviously an increase from where Trump put it, but not quite to the 35% that it was before. A 25% tax on billionaires. I'm curious if you agree with these as pay-fors, and sort of how would you get this done? Would this be something you would do through reconciliation, or would you not need to do that?
Like, we would certainly need to do it by legislation, and we probably would have to do it. I don't think we could do it if the Republicans remained in control of either the House or the Senate. But I would say this. Even the Business Roundtable, when the old corporate rate was at 35% and Trump was in power, they asked for 25%. Okay? They thought that was the businesses asking for that amount of tax cut. But Donald Trump, being the circus performer almost that he is, says, I'll go to 15%. It ended up at 21. I believe we should raise the corporate rate. We can decide how much. I believe that even reducing the top rate on individual income for very wealthy people who make over $400,000 or over $1 million is necessary. That will bring us revenues. It's not going to stunt the economy. It'll probably make the economy grow better. And it will help average families. When you read about average families not happy with the economy, it's because the prices and things that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz have proposed to remedy. I agree with what they're trying to do, that concept. It's very important. And let me tell you, it's one of the reasons of many we're going to win the election. Another reason we're going to win the election, before you ask, Supreme Court. Nobody wants these MAGA right people on the Supreme Court. They're way against, let me just say something here, Rachel. The hard right, the hard religious right and the hard economic right, realize that they wouldn't be able to get anything done even if they controlled the elected parts of the government, the House, the Senate, the presidency. So they've had a campaign to take over the courts, and it's resulted in disastrous legislation. If we keep the Senate and have the presidency, I think that the Supreme Court, if there are vacancies, you'll see it get much more moving to the middle instead of this hard right place.
Do you support term limits on Supreme Court justices? That's one idea that I know a lot of people are talking about.
Okay, let me say this first. The Supreme Court is a morass. It is an ethical morass. Who would ever believe that very wealthy individuals who would have been funding cases in the Supreme Court would simultaneously be allowed to give gifts to Supreme Court justices. I think Chief Justice Roberts has been derelict. He can stop this. And he's been derelict in his responsibility in not doing it. So we have to deal with that. But it's also a substantive morass. They have moved so far over, excuse me, not just on reproductive rights for women, but economic decisions, the Chevron decision, and things like that, that we got to look at this court very carefully. And my Senate, the Democrats in the Senate are doing that right now under the leadership of people like Dick Durbin and Sheldon Whitehouse.
But do you think it could include term limits, or are we talking more about sort of investigative
there are
cases?
lots of things that are on the table, and we'll give careful examination to all of them.
Okay. So beyond some of these policy specifics we've seen come out in the past couple days with Harris, we actually haven't had a lot of information on, what Democrats are going to do in those first few months. I know you're talking about a lot of ideas right now, and you mentioned, when y'all had the trifecta before, you passed a whole bunch of bills. So it is a fair question to ask, okay, what are of all these ideas you're throwing out, which ones are going to be sort of prioritized in those first few months? Can you tell us about your priorities? What would you like to see?
One of the first things we want to do is make sure democracy is preserved. We saw what happened January 6th. We saw the taking away of voting rights in Republican state after state. We see the reapportionment just jaundicing the whole public process. This number I'm amazed at. Wisconsin, 53% of the people voted for a Democrat for the local state house. I guess they call it the state House of Reps. But Democrats only had 35% of the seats. Get rid of that and get rid of Citizens United. The Supreme Court jaundiced the whole idea of the First Amendment by saying that the First Amendment required very wealthy people to infiltrate, is the word I'd use, our political system in any way they wanted. That's a priority. We came close last time, as you remember. We couldn't change the rules, but I think there would be a consensus in my caucus to try and do that.
But you're referring to the John Lewis bill? Is that what you're referring to?
The John Lewis. There's two bills. There's the Freedom to Vote Act and the John Lewis bill. Those two bills, which would be very, very important. Another thing we would try to do is continue to reduce the cost of prescription drugs. We've done some of that. We have more to go. There were things that we couldn't get done because we couldn't do it through reconciliation. More stuff. Look, our IRA bill on the environment was a huge success. We said there would be $369 billion in tax breaks for solar, wind, hydro, nuclear. There's over $1 trillion that's been invested. So, and these are businesses investing this money. Even conservative business organizations like these. We need to do more because look at what we've seen in terms of climate change across the whole country. Look in any part of the country, my part, the Northeast, but the West, the South, the Midwest, floods, everything. So we got to do more on climate change. That's another. There's a large agenda of things that we have to do. And I'll tell you, one of the first things we do is get rid of that horrible Supreme Court decision on Roe and preserve women's reproductive rights.
Okay, I got to ask you about the how here because, a lot of times when covering a new trifecta, the big question is, what are you going to do with reconciliation? Well, for this particular Congress, if you guys do win and sweep everything, the question is going to be, how do you get rid of the filibuster, it sounds like, or how do you just get rid of it for some legislation and not others? Right. Because you tried to do it with the John Lewis bill. Sinema and Manchin blocked. Both of those folks are going to be gone. If you have a majority, you can probably do it.
Yep.
So are you committing right now to changing the filibuster such that you can pass that bill?
I would work very hard. I would work very hard to persuade my colleagues to do just that. And I think we got a damn good chance of getting that done. As for the whole issue of the filibuster, we're going to have to sit down as a caucus and decide how and where and when to do it. But I think there's a broad consensus on the voting rights.
Yeah, abortion rights activists specifically wanted me to ask you, will you commit to getting rid of the filibuster to codify Roe v. Wade?
Look, again, I'll have to discuss that with my caucus. I don't make these. One of the reasons I hope I've been a successful leader of the Senate is I don't make unilateral decisions. I sit down. You know, let me say this, Rachel. I'm so proud of my caucus. Every Tuesday, we all come to lunch. And what I encourage our caucus members to do is speak their minds. You can disagree with one another, and you should. We should air these differences together, but show respect. No name calling, none of this other stuff, which you see in the Republican caucus a whole lot more than you do in ours. And it's worked. So we would do that again, and obviously I would like to see us get rid of Roe in any way we can, and we'll have to explore the best way to do it.
Quick lightning round, since I'm being told I have to wrap like right now or
Lightning
5 minutes
round.
ago. One of the quick answer. Let's start with this. It's January of 2025. How many seats do you guys have?
We're going to have a majority, as I said. Let me say one quick thing. Sorry about the lightning round. I'm from Brooklyn. You know, we're sort of valuable.
My events team is over there going. Yeah.
2 years ago, oh, Democrats are going to lose 3 or 4 seats. I said, no, we're going to keep the Senate, and we may pick up a seat or 2. People are saying the same thing now. We're going to lose 3 or 4 seats. We're going to keep the Senate and pick up a seat or 2.
So if you pick up a seat, it's probably going to be, it sounds like Florida or Texas, but are you going to put money into those states to actually flip them?
Wait and see. Not giving away our campaign strategy.
Okay, John Cornyn or John Thune? John Thune, sorry.
Well, look, I don't know. I mean, unfortunately, John Thune and John Cornyn, I disagree on many things, but both of them have shown they can work in a bipartisan way. But you got this growing Freedom Caucus, Tea Party type element in the Senate. They're already paralyzing the House, and they don't want to work with us on anything, and yet they have some power in the Republican Party. So I think there's a real chance you could get someone running the Senate who is much further to the right and very far away from where the average American is.
Should Harris do press interviews? Should Vice President Harris do some press interviews?
Whatever she wants, she's doing a great job.
Okay, last question. Number one thing she has to do to keep up the momentum to win in November?
Continue talking about working families, continue talking about getting costs down, continue talking about the kinds of issues that she has. There's a contrast here. Donald Trump doesn't talk about any issues. He calls names, he makes up things, he comes up with stories that are totally false. Kamala Harris is focusing on things people care about. Keep it up, and we're going to win the election, and we're going to win the election by more than people think.
That's all the time we have for Leader Schumer. Thank you for your time.
Rachel, a pleasure.
And when you get those 100-day plans finalized, maybe do the exclusive with Playbook.
Well, they
People
were
can
very
read it there.
nice because in the motorcade we were a half hour late, but we're still doing the show.
Very
so
good.
I owe you one.
Oh, all right.
Thank you.
Everybody got that on the record?
I didn't say what it would be.
Yeah, it's an exclusive sit down for Playbook.